To the American Academy of Grief Counseling's Videogram on traumatic grief and school shootings. And this is a very, very sad topic, a very unfortunate topic that shouldn't exist, you would think, especially in the United States, where schools are a source of knowledge, a source of community. But instead, for many, they've become a source for traumatic grief and death. And that's one of the sad realities that are dealt with in modern America. The thought that maybe a child, your child, or a child you know, may be a victim of a school shooting itself. And it's very sombering, it's very terrifying. And in itself is a grief and a stress that is collective, that not only affects the individual, but the nation's psyche as a whole. So while there are many political issues that go with this as well, what we're going to be concerned with towards the end is more so the traumatic grief and the post-traumatic stress disorder that sets in for some in this type of horrific event as a school shooting. In terms of some stats, ever since the Sandy Hook promise, which of course was a very historic and unfortunate school shooting, there are some sombering realities. 1 in 8 children die just in gun violence alone. And we're not just referring to school shootings, but any type of shootings in the neighborhoods or through gang shootings and so forth. Shootings are the leading cause of death for children and teens in the United States. There's been 1,316 school shootings since 1970. And every 4 out of 5 shootings, at least one person knew of the attacker's plan. And in almost every case, there were some type of warning signs that were just dismissed, overlooked, or not seen as important. 77% of the school shootings were planned weeks in advance. And 68% of the school shootings, the gun was taken from the home. And 39% of parents believe that their guns are locked and are stored safely with ammo separately, and they're not. Matter of fact, 4.6 million children live in homes where firearms are not secure in themselves. So as you can see with this picture of stats coming together, these incidents can be prevented. There's warning signs for them. But despite all these warning signs, it still remains one of the leading killers of children in the United States. And they can be prevented with better gun safety. Gun safety in regards to how guns are stored at home, access to guns towards individuals who have mental illness. So the social issues that arise are mental health and weak gun safety laws. And again, I don't want to get too political, so we're just going to be very brief. With the mental health issues, obviously, there is a mental health problem in the United States. There's not enough treatment for it. It's not diagnosed quick enough. A lot of it's tucked or swept under the rug. There's a lot of bullying issues that aren't addressed in schools and in society as itself, which leads to some aggression at some point. And then on the other side, there's the gun laws where individuals can purchase guns at gun shows, for the most part, without even having to have a background check. Of course, background checks are presented at regular dealers, but there are ways that guns can be put through the loopholes, and get to individuals' hands that shouldn't have those guns. And also, there are cases with some of these gun laws where individuals give them to other people without an appropriate documentation of them being actually given. So there are a lot of gun laws that probably need to be made a little stronger. And I am no way advocating an end to the Second Amendment, obviously, but there are ways to keep guns out of people's hands who shouldn't have those guns. And there are ways for people who should have those guns to be more responsible and held responsible for making sure that they don't fall into other people's hands themselves. Now, in regards to those who become victim to these issues due to mental illness or to individuals having guns they shouldn't have, this is what we want to primarily focus on what are they going to go through and who needs to be focused on so that no one gets left behind in a school shooting. And in a school shooting, it's not only a social and in a social issue where the whole community is scarred, and an individual issue where the individual is scarred, but it's a national. It affects everyone in the country. Whoever goes to any school, anywhere, there's going to be some type of anxiety, from the individual to the school itself, to the community of the school, to the nation itself, that has millions of families sending their children to school. So when it comes to the emotional scarring of the individual, it's obviously more intense there for those who are closer to the trauma and those who are closer to the relationship of those who were victims, or even the shooter themselves, if they're related to the shooter. And there's going to be a lot of scarring in terms of survival guilt. And by survival guilt, we mean individuals who constantly replay what they should have done. Crisis intervention, emergency response units, soldiers, they experience survivor guilt in death and life situations. So schoolmates who shouldn't even have to be in this situation might experience survival guilt in how they behaved. Did they feel that they didn't behave brave enough, or are they ashamed in something that they did when trying to survive? And maybe some will feel guilty that their friend died and they didn't. There's also going to be a death imprint upon them due to the severe trauma. And when we look at PTSD, the more traumatic, the more grotesque, unfathomable thing that occurs, the worse. And when it's done at the hands of another human being, it's even more incomprehensible. So there's going to be a death imprint that just haunts this individual. He's going to have death anxiety, and PTSD could set in immediately. It could be delayed. It could be chronic. And the individual is going to have fragmented memories of the event, of the trauma, because the trauma was so severe, it wasn't able to be processed into the long-term memory. So there's going to be a lot of cases of PTSD and other complications with the grief, prolonged grief, maybe later depression. Now, we need to also identify those who are closest to the events, but they might not have been necessarily in the room or an individual that was shot, but they are still individuals who need to be looked at. Parents and family, one of the worst pains in the world is to lose a son or daughter. Teachers and staff who might also have some of these other pains or might be victims, other injured victims, direct witnesses and classmates. The police and rescue who arrive on the scene or have to deal with the shooter. And then the community itself, that individuals who weren't necessarily at the school, maybe they go to other schools, or there are other parts of the community that share within the church and so forth. So there is going to be a social grief that just like a rain cloud envelops the entire city or town where this disaster occurred, where this catastrophe occurred. So when we're looking at helping individuals heal from this atrocious event, or at least to help process the pain and the memories, there's a lot that needs to be done. A lot of times crisis and grief counselors are called on scene, but in the long term, those grief counselors will either have to be licensed counselors or therapists to really help the individual long-term down the road deal with those. So we need to make on the short term, and at least an assessment of those with the highest complications in grief. So the individual themselves that was shot, the classmates that witnessed the shooting, those in the school. So we need to look for those individuals when there is a mass grief counseling event where students are called in to talk to school counselors, to talk to other outsourced professionals who are outsourced and who come into the school to help assess, to talk to the students about their experience themselves. And in this also, there is a social outreach to the school, to the staff, and those who work in the education department and within the community itself, working with the church, working with other programs to identify these types of individuals so that no one is left behind in the grieving process. And this involves not only working with those in the school, but having programs that go to the household as well. So when we go to the household of an individual, we're able to help family members, especially mothers or fathers who are dealing with a loss of a child. Now, within the school, it's important for there to be remembrance and security. That's one of the things that is most important and also most critical for the stability of the students. They need to have a time to remember, to commemorate, and to process this loss together, to share these experiences. It's almost very similar to that of a support group where individuals are able to talk. And in this way, during remembrance, counselors can also pinpoint individuals who are more so struggling moving forward. The second thing I mentioned was security, though, remembrance and security. And the most important thing is for the individuals, especially with PTSD, to feel secure. Individuals who are fearful of that school, certain traumas or triggers might set them off. A sound of someone walking down the hall, a doorknob turning. These can be all triggers. So a sense of security from the staff, and by taking the appropriate measures to ensure that the student body and the teaching staff is safe, maybe with armed patrol, an officer who's able to stay there and to monitor the situation, more cameras, so that security is able to, but also from an interior way too, knowing that individuals who are suicidal or individuals who are a threat are identified. Remember at the start of this video, we said most of these things have been in the planning and at least one person knew about it. So part of security is also having an interior confidence within the building that if something is aloof, if something is not right, something doesn't smell right, that the situation is going to be resolved. In addition to this, communities pour out, especially with the Sandy Book Promise, that grief pushes itself out, and social causes are ways to help individuals heal. For those who take on causes of mental health or better gun laws, and this is a way for them to find meaning, for them to help integrate the loss in dealing with what occurred. So many will make themselves very busy in these new causes. And it's important, though, that during these causes that they don't lose themselves, that they put themselves too much into it to avoid the grief work that they need to do themselves. So it's good, but it also needs to be done within a certain standard so that individuals are dealing with their grief and also allowing it to have meaning, to integrate the loss itself. Also, follow-up care is crucial. A lot of individuals are left to the wayside after the event and it's forgotten. So it's important within the next couple of months for the student body to be able to have someone present, to be able to talk to them about what they might be experiencing 3 months later, 6 months later, a year. And also for family that was more directly affected by the tragedy, for them to be able to find the help they need. Ultimately, the help that is given to these individuals is to help them to process traumatic grief so it doesn't become fragmented and result in PTSD. It's to help them become more acceptable to the fact that this evil thing occurred and that it happened. There's no going back. To accept the fact that it's traumatic, it's forever, it's horrible, it's a cross they're going to have to carry, but to be able to process it in a healthy way, to live with it, to make change, and to move forward, but never forgetting. There is no cure for this. It's a great loss, it's a great tragedy, it's a horrible event. So the best that can happen in these types of things for healing is to have a healthy response to the loss, to be able to move forward. But the wound will always be there, the scar will always be there, but there's certain treatment that needs to be done for that wound. And if that is not done, the wound will be far worse and cause much greater mental and emotional damage. And this is why the professional help is so important in these types of horrible, nightmarish events themselves. We offer here at the American Academy of Grief Counseling a grief counseling certification. And below is a link about the actual program itself. It's an online program, it's independent study, and it leads, after you complete the 4 courses, it leads to a 4-year certification. Your certification lasts for 4 years and then you renew it every 4. We can be reached at 330-652-7776 and can also be emailed at info@aihcp.org. Again, that's info@aihcp.org. So every day, we're almost anticipating the worst. Like, when is the next Sandy Hook? When is the next shooting going to occur? Will it be at a movie theater? Will it be at a grocery store? Will it be at a school? When is it going to happen? And that's really sad to know that it's probably going to happen again. And the fact that it keeps repeating itself. So we really have to work harder as a nation in regards to mental health, gun laws, but also identifying as best as we can and try to minimize this until whatever is the root cause of this problem vanishes from our society. But it hasn't vanished yet, and that's unfortunate. And so there's going to be a need to help those through traumatic grief, through these types of events, and to remember always to keep them in your prayers. Thank you for listening and have a good day.